Do you believe that there is life after death and wonder how it looks like? Will we go to heaven or suffer in hell after we die? Hello everyone and welcome to our channel, where we share mind-blown near-death experiences stories all over the world. Today's story about an old man died and had an unexpected trip to his past life. Lay back, relax and let's begin. My dad, 𝘁𝗵𝗄, had been diagnosed with renal cell carcinoma and had his right kidney removed. Roughly a year later, the cancer returned and this time it showed up as a large tumor wrapped around his spine, mid-back. During surgery, the surgeon cut an artery and my dad bled to death. 2 days later, my dad, who was not religious at all, told me that he had felt his spirit come out of his body and he felt that he was about 3 feet parallel with his body. He had looked down, and wasn't afraid to see what was going on. He then became vertical and found himself standing to the left of the doctor, at his physical body's head. The nurses and attendants were running around getting instruments to try to get the bleeding to stop. While telling me this story, up to this point, my dad had had a faraway look in his eyes, but then he paused and told me that he could tell me the names of the instruments the doctors and nurses were using, because he could remember every detail of his journey. He watched the commotion for a while and then he took a few steps backward into the corner of the operating room, as if to give the medical staff room to work. As he was standing in the corner, he then found himself going into another consciousness of himself feeling the pain of being born, of going through his mother's birth canal. He told me that that was the worst pain he had ever felt. He asked me if I remembered that he was claustrophobic and I replied, "Yes, I remember." He said, "Well, now I know why I have been claustrophobic." He went on, "When I was 3 years old, we lived on an old farm. I was standing in my overalls and barefooted, in the kitchen, next to Mama. Mama told me that she had been missing 2 hens and thought they were up in the loft of the barn. She told me to go to the barn, climb the ladder, and if I found her 2 hens, to shoo them out and bring any eggs I might find. I told her, 'Yes, ma'am.' So I climbed the ladder. Up in the loft the loose hay was almost as tall as I was, but I saw the hens, made my way over to them and shooed them out of the loft. I even found 2 eggs. I proudly put them in my overall pockets. When I tried to get to the ladder, my foot got tangled up in some rope. When I yanked my foot to try to get loose, it just tightened. I felt myself backing up into something big and heavy. It fell on top of me and pushed me down under the tall, dirty hay, where I felt like I couldn't breathe. I yelled and yelled as loud as I could, but my brothers didn't come to my rescue for what seemed like hours to my 3-year-old self. And, he said, "Now I know why I'm claustrophobic." He then told me another story. He said, "Sis, I never knew how much my words have hurt people. When I was about 9, I was throwing dirt clods at my cousin, Luther. We started calling each other names and we both thought it was funny to hurt each other. But while I was dead, I not only heard myself call him names, but I was also in his head hearing the words I was saying to him and feeling how they affected him. I made him feel real bad, but I never realized it. I never even thought about it. I have heard every conversation I ever said to anybody, and I was also given the gift of being in every single person's mind to know how I've hurt people by what I've said." He apologized to me, through his tears, for making fun of me as a child for stuttering so badly. I never told him that he had made me cry as a child, but he said now he knows every time it happened, because he had been able to be in my mind during his NDE. He said he also remembered all the times when he chose not to forgive people for something they did or said to him. From that experience, he said, he came back to watching the medical staff work on his body attempting to revive him. As he watched, he said, he started drifting vertically up. The operating room is on the 1st floor. He went through the ceiling and stood across from the elevator. To the left of the elevator was another one, just like him. It was a middle-aged man. They nodded to each other and Dad proceeded to go up to the next floor. He kept going up and up into the darkness of space. In the far distance, he saw what looked like a small area of green fog. His spirit turned horizontal and started moving towards it until it formed into a meadow with wild flowers and small trees. It was bright daylight. He was thinking, this must be heaven and I'm here because I've tried to be good to people. Then he started moving faster until the meadow was left behind him in a blur. As he looked ahead, he saw what looked like the Grand Canyon, but instead of the end of it being an open-ended riverbed, it was round and surrounded by huge brown boulders. He was no longer near the beauty of the meadow. He found himself out in the middle of the boulders floating over a great expanse of blackness below. He couldn't see the bottom by looking down, all he could see was a huge black hole. As he was wondering what was going on, he began to hear a sound like the wind. This wind got louder until it sounded like high-pitched screams. One voice stood out, and he heard from below someone pleading, "Please. When you come, bring me a drop of water." Then he knew that he had been tricked by Satan into thinking he was going to be in heaven. Instead, he was on his way to hell because he didn't know Jesus as his Savior. But right at that time, the doctors brought him back to life. None of our family knew that Dad had died until the following day. I went to see him in the intensive care unit at the hospital. The anesthesiologist was standing by Dad's side, saying to me that he had wanted to come to check on his patient. He said to me, "They did tell you we lost him yesterday, didn't they?" I was shocked and said, "No." He told me about the surgeon hitting an artery and that Dad had bled to death. He also said that he was clinically dead for 12 minutes and very lucky to be alive. While trying to soak all of this in, I turned to Dad. He had tubes in his nose and mouth, but he opened his eyes and started crying. I asked him if he was hurting and he shook his head. I asked him if he needed to tell me something and he nodded. I reassured him that maybe tomorrow, he would be able to tell me. The next day, I went to see him in his private room. When he saw me, he started crying again. Up until this time, I had never seen my dad cry, never. Not even when his parents died or when he found out he had cancer. I went over to his bedside and he said he had a story to tell me. When he finished telling me what I've just told you, he said that he had led his life all wrong and he now knew that Jesus was his Savior and no longer would he have bitterness in his heart. His story really made him realize that material possessions don't matter as much as he thought they did. He realized that true happiness comes from within and that material possessions cannot bring lasting fulfillment. It inspired us that the importance of living a meaningful life, focusing on the things that truly matter, and letting go of negativity and anger. It also shows us that death is not something to be feared, but rather an opportunity to transcend to a higher state of being. We had him for 2 more years, but I believe those were the best years of his life. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe and turn on your notification to receive the latest NDE story from our channel. May God bless you all.